Just sure what you mean by that.
Yeah, there's a philosophy behind that, and I use that sort of famous scene from The Matrix just to kind of connect it back to what I think the decision-making process kind of needs to be often, from what I've seen from working with lots of different businesses and business owners. But the philosophy behind it is, and this is my personal philosophy that I've used, and some people will challenge the sequence, but I think it's still right, is that you've got to create a certain amount of freedom in your life. Usually that means time freedom to be able to create a certain amount of wealth. Now, wealth could be defined both from a monetary context, but it can also be, the experiences that we have, the people that surround us. And what I found to be true is that when people sort of think of it like leveling up, once people achieve a certain amount of freedom, they have the ability to create a certain amount of wealth, which then allows them to create a certain amount of impact.
Nick, you are very welcome back to the ScaleX Insider podcast. It is absolutely brilliant to see you again.
Brendan, it is a pleasure being back here and connecting. Every time we have a conversation, there's always a new idea or something. So I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about today.
And we have great reason for you to be back. Not only did you deliver huge value the last time, but I am absolutely delighted and thrilled that you are releasing your new book, Exit for Millions, and we're going to get into that today. But before we do that, I want to just get a sense of where you're at in 2025. It was 2022, almost 3.5 years ago, when you were last on the podcast. So our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So Nick, in 2025, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
I knew that you would start with this. So I haven't prepared it, but I think, you know what? I think scaling is really interesting right now. I started the podcast, Scale Up Your Business, as you know, in 2019. So as I look back sort of over 6 years and everything that's changed, there seems to be a lot of talk about scaling now more than ever. And I think what's interesting is people still get it confused. And I don't think people really understand or appreciate what it means to transition from something that, is potentially serving them really, really well into something that is, a bigger entity that's creating more impact. And I think the big challenge, which I'm sure you have spoken about at length, is the AI transitions around that. And what does that mean for scaling? And what does that mean for the opportunities that are going to be created in the future? And I look at it kind of from a practical standpoint about what are the operating models going to look like, and what is the investment thesis, certainly from my background in private equity, around what that's going to mean. So I think what we're going to see is more people stepping in to this idea of scaling, being able to enable technology to facilitate that more quickly. But I think the watch out of that is, the unknowns that we don't know is coming. So remember, for me, it's always been about people and numbers. And when you take people away because there's more technology coming in, that creates other uncertainties and complexities. So I think that's the big thing, the big shift that we all have to look out for.
There is no question, and we've explored the impact of AI on this podcast before. We'll get into some of that today. You touched on it right at the outset of that response about the shift in mindset in terms of moving from running a business to actually scaling a business, and what is required as a leader in relation to actually changing your mindset to understand that what got you to here will not necessarily get you to there. When you answered that question the last time, you said you will never scale beyond the level of your own identity. And I'm curious, 3.5 years on, what have you done to upgrade your identity? How have your beliefs shifted in 3.5 years? So what did you not know back then that you now know that is an upgrade in your identity?
I like to say, Brendan, that I'm still a student of the game, right? So every year I'm learning something new. I think for me personally, and some of the decisions that I've made, it's been being more sort of globally orientated and having more of a macro view. And I think that's a shift that a lot of business owners also need to understand and appreciate. And I'll give you a bit of a process of how I've thought about that personally, which I'm now starting to help my clients with as well. But I think, if you think about how a business grows, right? When you start it, you have to do everything. You are consumed in the whole thing. You are the person literally, doing the sales, doing the marketing, doing the delivery, turning the lights on and off. You can't do anything else but focus on what's there in front of you. But as you start to scale, you start to build more people around you. We know all this. You start to elevate your thinking. And for me, as I've started to kind of get more involved, I suppose, in the wider industry of business growth and expansion and things like that, I've realized that the most important thing is partnerships and doing things with and through others that are more connected, more able, more motivated maybe to do certain things. So 3 years ago, I was still in that process of I have to be the center of the wheel, the center of the cog doing everything. Whereas now I realize that I have to have the right people around who share that similar values and vision. And that's what has probably made me be able to build my brand and businesses more globally, and actually has allowed me to step away. We talked about my trip that I just took before we press record. Just got back from 6-7 weeks away with the kids, where I kind of worked maybe 1 hour a week. I couldn't do that 3 years ago, right? So things like that have been intentional shifts, but also understanding how I can leverage more of the relationships and resources around me.
I love that, and I'm only a little bit envious of the fact that you've just returned from 7 weeks with the kids from LA to Australia and everywhere in between. So well done on well done on that. I mean, your kids, you're sharing, they're 10 and 13. Yep. It's really about making memories. Both of us are 50 at this stage, and it's about, what is true wealth. We're going to get into wealth creation, but what is true wealth? I feel it's actually making those memories, and you only get one opportunity. You cannot go back. So we're going to explore some of that today, but I want to address it head on, because the last time we spoke at length about the fact that you had left private equity. You had become disillusioned with the whole world of private equity. You felt that it just wasn't congruent with your values at that time, and you've now gone back into private equity. So tell me why are you going back in?
I'll be really honest on this show with you, right? I'm still conflicted about that, and I'll explain why. So I think in order to serve the business owners that I want to serve, I need to not run away from some of the things that I experienced in my past, which I've shared previously. It's not, sometimes people say, oh, you hate private equity, Nick. And I said, I don't hate private equity at all. I just realized that there are rules to that game that if you're not prepared to understand them, you can be taken advantage of, and it can be very exploitive. Right? That's the reality of it. But I also kind of love the game. And I also respect that when people are masters of anything, you've got to have some respect for that. But sometimes they can misalign with your values. So when I left private equity back in 2018, one of my founding, I suppose, considerations was this idea of almost being like the Robin Hood for entrepreneurs, right? Like, not to say it's steal from the rich and give to the poor, not quite like that, but there's a different level of value exchange. And I used to say that I'm unapologetically now sitting on the side of the founder, on that side of the table. So my foray back into private equity, I'm still taking sort of what I call baby steps, if I'm honest, Brendan. And I'm testing the waters to see whether A, it's congruent with what I have now become, back to identity, and whether I can affect it in the way that I want to affect it. And honestly, if I can't, then I'm just going to go back to what I said was true back in 2018, but provide the ecosystem, the mechanism for founders to still realize wealth and impact through exiting their companies, but making sure that anyone that's involved in my world does that ethically and does that the right way.
I get it. I completely
Yeah.
get it. You know, it's easy to sit on the outside and lambast the way the game's played over there. You know, if you really want to change it, you must have a seat at the table. I think you must be inside it, you know. So no, I get it. Um, and I'm excited to see where you go with this and curious to see where you go with it. But no, I absolutely understand the rationale for being inside to affect the change rather than the outside,
Yeah.
kind of shouting about why that needs to change. So, coming to your book, look, congratulations. This is well overdue, my friend. You give so much value to the world. I can't believe that this is only your first book. It seems like you've delivered so much over the years, that it's taken to this time to get your book out there. Exit for Millions, the private equity blueprint for scaling and selling your business for maximum value. Now, what I found with this, you open the book by encouraging business owners and leaders to take the red pill. It's a line out of the Matrix, leaning on the language from the Matrix for those who have seen that film before. What do you hope leaders will take from the book to encourage them to take the red pill and make the change that you want to see? Just sure what you mean by that.
Yeah, there's a philosophy behind that, and I use that sort of famous scene from The Matrix just to kind of connect it back to what I think the decision-making process kind of needs to be often, from what I've seen from working with lots of different businesses and business owners. But the philosophy behind it is, and this is my personal philosophy that I've used, and some people will challenge the sequence, but I think it's still right, is that you've got to create a certain amount of freedom in your life. Usually that means time freedom to be able to create a certain amount of wealth. Now, wealth can be defined both from a monetary context, but it can also be, the experiences that we have, the people that surround us. And what I found to be true is that when people sort of think of it like leveling up, once people achieve a certain amount of freedom, they have the ability to create a certain amount of wealth, which then allows them to create a certain amount of impact. Now, sometimes people will say, well, hold on, you create freedom, then you create impact, and then you build wealth. So maybe this exists more as a circle than a linear pathway. But what I found in my sort of PE landscape and working with business owners at the early stages of their companies all the way through to an exit is that linear path is pretty common if you understand it and you appreciate it and you make the choice. So what I mean by that is, if I'm stuck in the chaos of my business, working all weekends, all the stuff that you and I see all the time when people come to us, I'm never going to create a true level of freedom, right? I'm always going to be, whether it's actually being stuck or chained to the thing I've created, really, or emotionally or mentally or whatever, that's where you're at. It's very hard to create wealth off the back of that, because even if you create a certain amount of financial wealth, you're still emotionally tied to this thing you've created, right? And then I challenge people, how much impact can you make in the world? If one of the highest modalities that we can ever achieve is creating impact for others, how can you do that when you're consumed by all these other things? Okay. So if you take that philosophy and then you go back to what you said about the pills in the book, the big change, the idea of exiting for millions is actually not really about the money. I mean, I've called it that because people will resonate with it because it's the first thing you think about, but it's not actually, it's what you become as a result. And so the idea is, if you take the red pill and you say, you know what, I'm here to create more impact, I'm here to do something bigger. And I do believe that entrepreneurship has the ability to change the world more than any government can. I think I even said that 3 years ago on your show, and I believe that's even more true today. I think that people who are prepared to take the red pill step into the arena to play a bigger game. And that's what the book's about. The book is, firstly, make the choice, because if you really want to do it, you can. Now I'm going to show you how the game is played at that level. And then I'm going to show you the practical ways of how you can think about your entrepreneurship journey to create that outcome.
I absolutely love that. And again, I get it. You know, I suppose you've got the clickbait headline there that everyone will be attracted to, but actually, that's to lure people in because ultimately, this process of scaling will see you scaling yourself and your own identity. It'll see you scaling others in the context of your team, and ultimately see you
Yep.
scaling your organization such that you will widen your impact. And when you reflect back, which is why I was keen to ask the question right at the outset, and in 3.5 years, when you reflect back, what has your personal scaling journey looked like in terms of your own belief system? And so just coming to this, because people will grasp that and go, yeah, who doesn't want to both create lots of impact, financial success, freedom, and doing this purposefully? Everyone wants that. So let's just begin at the start. Do you believe every business can scale? What are the some of the kind of fundamental headlines that we need to make people aware of, just to get them to the start line so they can begin to see the belief here that actually, well, I could scale this? Because there may be a lot of people listening, I suspect, who, like you've alluded to, we call them the dead man walking, who are caught in the bowels of the business, absolutely entrapped by this business that they founded in the first place to create a level of freedom, and it's now chained them. So I suspect there's a lot listening who will resonate with that. So can every business scale?
Yeah, I mean, I've had experience certainly in my private equity days of every industry creating scalable companies. So if your question is, can any business model scale? Of course. We can define what that means, and there's certain ways of scaling which are very typical in my private equity world, which is through acquisitions and creating groups and all sorts of different things that are quite crucial to that. But I think the bigger question for me is, can every entrepreneur scale? Right? And that I fundamentally believe is no, I don't believe they can. Certainly, do they have the ability to do it? Yes, they do. Do they have the mindset? Probably not. Possibly not. And I think Daniel Priestley says it the best when he talks about the entrepreneurship journey. And that dead man walking sort of really really messy in the beginning, where you're not making enough money, you're not getting enough freedom, and you give up, which is the reason why most businesses don't survive, right? It's because it's just too hard. But then you get into that section that Daniel talks about the lifestyle business, and I think that's a great business, right? Like if that's all you want to achieve, right, you're gonna create a certain amount of freedom, a certain amount of wealth, and a certain amount of impact if you have a lifestyle business. And there's nothing wrong with that. I sort of take Daniel's thinking and I say that when he talks about a performance business, which is the stage up and there's a big messy middle in between, that's the decision to scale. And that's the decision, as far as I'm concerned, where it comes into my world, because it may be the first time you're going to bring investment in. As soon as you bring investment in, no investor I know just wants to take home a small little dividend. They're there to create a capital event, right? In my world of private equity. So that decision to go from sort of a really nice lifestyle business into a performance business that is valuable and exitable, and the messy piece in the middle of that, I don't think all entrepreneurs can do that. And I think that's where my red pill analogy kind of lands here, is, are you prepared to make that decision? Right? That's the key piece, because sometimes, and there's nothing wrong with the answer is no.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had a PT over the last 12 months, and I sent him pictures of the guy that I wanted to look like at 50.
I've done that. At the moment it's Brad Pitt. I did a post. I've got to jump in. I did a post this week with I cried at the end of the F1 movie.
That's brilliant. It's
because I always
brilliant.
get like emotional about sports turnarounds,
it's
right?
Amazing film.
And I'm there with my wife, and she's like, I've just turned 51, and she goes, "Oh, you look pretty good for 50, but you don't quite look like him." I'm like, what? So I said to my personal trainer, I said, "We've got a new goal."
Yeah. Make me look like Brad Pitt.
Make me look like Brad Pitt at 60 or whatever age he is. So
yeah, incredible. So I sent it. it wasn't Brad Pitt, but somebody who had a stomach like him. And I said, that's what I want to look like at 50. And he said, okay, yep. He said, this is back to our words. This is simple, but it's not easy. This is going to require effort. And then he sent me back what was required in terms of my nutrition. He says that you've got it's all there, and you don't have to do anything more in the gym. But what you're going to have to do is really dial in your nutrition. When he sent back what I was going to have to do, I said, "Wow, I'm not sure about this." He says, "Yeah, you've got to answer a fundamental question here." I said, "Well, what's that?" He says, "Are you committed or are you interested?" He said,
Terrible.
we're all interested. We're all interested in wanting the six pack, but very few of us are actually committed. And I think this is the question that entrepreneurs have to answer in relation to scaling. You know, are you interested? And I think everyone who runs a business is interested in actually widening their reach and deepening their impact. And but actually, very few are committed to the scaling process, that scaling journey. In your experience, what is it typically that holds people back? What is the unlock to actually move from being interested to committed?
Yeah, I think I've gone through the same experience. If we draw on that personal trainer thing, like, yeah, would I like to look like Brad Pitt, right? Yeah, I would, but am I prepared to sort of give up, having a glass of wine and a beer and whatever else, and whatever that is? And the answer is probably no right now because I'm, quite enjoying things and relaxing. But so I think it's a similar sort of piece. I think it's a little bit like, have you ever heard that analogy of, you'll give up smoking, for example, when there's a reason that's more painful to give it up than the pleasure that you get. And I think it's similar in business. If there is a bigger, to your language, purpose or why that sits behind the reason to scale, and there's lots of different things we can touch in on that, which I think be important, then I think the commitment piece levels up. Whereas if it doesn't really matter, right? Like if you haven't got a bigger vision or goal behind that, it's easy to not be prepared to do what's required to do it. Right. So for me, like I get really angry because of the experiences that I went through when business owners are taken advantage of, when they get to the point where their business is transferable. And I sat on too many, boardroom conversations where I saw that exploitation happen. So my whole thing is leveling the playing field, right? I want to make sure that, the business owners, that once they get to that stage, which is beyond the scaling stage to some extent, but it's through that they get what they deserve. I genuinely care about that. And that's not something I'd ever retire from. So for me, the impact piece of that sits at that level. So therefore, the journey to scale the various things that I do, my personal branding, all the effort that we put into these things, comes off the back of that's an idea of the future that I will always want to be able to have an impact on.
Yeah, good on you.
So therefore, I'm committed to that.
Yeah. No, and we could spend a podcast entirely speaking about mindset, but I also want to dive into some of the tactics that you've laid out in your book. But let's just transition people there for a moment. So anchoring this on the back of, look, exiting from millions, it isn't about the money. Yes, that's important, and let's not discount that as being important for everyone who is in business. But actually, what's really purposeful here and what's really meaningful in the context of, answering the question, are you interested or committed, is, you should get committed to being a better version of yourself, to upgrading your belief system, to leveling up your identity, to becoming the person that you want your kids or others to truly admire in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years time, because you've deliberately leaned into challenges and found ways of overcoming those challenges, and reflected back and go, look, I'm resilient, I'm resourceful, I've had the ability to create teams, all of that good stuff. So there's a reason why people should actually, and we advocate for it, scale and scale with purpose. Coming to the business itself, what are the headlines that make for a high value business? And then we'll get into some of the levers, some of the tactics to get us there. But what are some of the headlines there?
Yeah, and I think when we talk about the business and we talk about the concept of value, um, I'm looking at it through the investor lens. So quite often, if I think about the transition of how a business owner kind of goes through the cycles of sort of private equity investment world, you might start as the operator, then you become the real owner, and then you become the investor when you create a liquidity event. So I'm always looking at it through value in terms of characteristics that can be transferred, up the chain. So the biggest businesses in the world, the ones that have the highest market caps, remember they all started in a garage somewhere. They started with an idea. And so you've got to kind of think, how did they get to that level? Well, they got to that level by obviously the growth that they've got, but also playing up levels of ownership and investment and those sort of things. So for me, a high value business is one that is simple in terms of its strategy. A lot of the best businesses I work with can get their strategy on a page, right? It's nothing complex about it. They are intentionally built so that they, if you're putting in a certain amount of investment or resources, there's a compounding effect on that. So if I'm putting in a buck to create a result, I'm going to get $2 back or more, right? So there's that. So you've got the scalable business model from a growth perspective. You create sort of processes to some extent above people, which sounds a bit odd because obviously we say people is one of the most crucial things, but the whole idea is that they're like a rowing eight, right? They're performing as one unified team. They have their various capabilities, but it's very clear how sort of the sum of the parts creates the outcome, right? So you've got all those various components too, because when you start to put all that together, you start to create something that can continually grow over time because it comes, predictable, repeatable, and sustainable. Now, I say all that under the guise that technology is disrupting everything right now, but even so, I still think that that's going to enable some of these things. When you then add to that, recurring revenue models around how money is made, brands that are unique and remarkable within their marketplaces because they've managed to connect and resonate with their ideal clients, customers, culture driven by performance and values, which allows people to operate within a certain structure but still have autonomy. All of these are characteristics of a high value business because if I'm going to buy that business, I'm buying the transferability of it. And what I'm really saying is something here has got to a certain level where it's ready for the baton pass to something bigger. And in my world of private equity, that usually means taking that platform, as we call it, which is the first acquisition a PE firm will make, and then scaling it rapidly through things like mergers and acquisitions and partnerships. So I can only do that if the core fundamentals of that business are there, which makes them valuable in their own right, which means I can then compound on top of that, right? If that's not there, I'm buying a distressed asset and I'm in a turnaround situation. That's a very different thing. That's a low value business.
So fundamentally, the strategy should be very simple, one page, really, passing the granny test. Everyone should be able to understand
Yep.
Where it is you're going, what you're trying to do here, what problem you solve, what need you service. Very, very simple and easy to understand. There's an intentionality to what you're building by virtue of the fact that you're building a scalable business model. You are dialed into actually creating processes as the scaffolding to scale beyond independent of any particular person, but you're bringing a team of people together aligned towards what you're trying to do here from a simple strategic perspective
And cultural as well to that point. So that's where, and the other thing I'll say here is, the old saying of right people, right seats still holds true. But if you have any one individual who's the superstar, right, in the situation of a scalable business, it becomes quite challenging because you never want to have any dependence on any one individual. It's the whole thing about the team is more important. And sometimes people get that confused because they have a sporting analogy like, oh, well, the Bulls would never have won all those titles without Michael Jordan. Yeah, quite possibly. You do need to have stars within their lanes, but you can't have any one individual. It's very hard to transfer something to someone else if you've got that dependence.
Yeah. Which is often why you have this earnout situation where there's still an understanding that the business is still dependent on the founder, the owner, and I suppose the PE guys want to limit the risk in that regard. So we'll keep this person in the business for a period of time, and so just coming to that, then this will resonate and make sense to our listeners. What do you know from the world of private equity that we don't then, as business owners, as founders, as entrepreneurs, that we should know, which is the essence of your book, that is going to support us in actually leveraging what we already have there? It's a broad question, but let's.
Yeah, I'm gonna reference the book a little bit for this piece because it's in there, and the detail is important. So I don't want to do it a misjustice here by trying to just skim over it. I think what I said at the outset of the conversation is private equity and large exits, big exits, all that sort of stuff is simply a game that you can learn to play. But most business owners either don't appreciate that it is a game that you can learn to play, or they just get so fixated on the growth and scale of their companies that when it comes to a point where they're going to transfer that asset, they haven't thought it through. So the biggest thing that happens to me, which is been a challenge over the last few years, is people come to me and they say, I can't wait to work with you when I'm ready. And I'm like, what does that mean exactly? Oh, when my business is ready for sale. And I'm like, this is like the Olympics, right? It happens every maybe once in a lifetime, right? You've got 4 years or more to prepare. We're not talking about the day of the event here. Now, in the book, I talk about the 15 reasons why a private equity firm, won't buy your company. It's actually one of my more successful podcast episodes. I think it's the most downloaded episode. And they're 15, they're so simple, Brendan. We touched on some of them, but they're 15 things that are like, okay, if I have one marketing channel which drives, say, 80% of all my leads, and let's say it's dependent on a platform like Facebook or LinkedIn, and that changes, right? Because you've got no control. We don't control that. Do you think I'm going to value that highly when I try to buy your company? Or am I going to put that into the risk column? Okay, classic one. This happened this week, looking at a business doing just over 1.2 million of EBITDA. Really nice business. I'd call it more of a lifestyle business, but has the potential to be part of a group to create more of a performance entity. Cannot operate without the founder, who's now 58, running everything. So guess what that business is worth?
Very little. If it's
pretty close to zero.
Wow.
I mean, it would only work if it was bought by a very specific business that didn't need that person and was very comfortable with the fact that they had someone else that could pick up all of those levers. But if that person doesn't already exist in the business, like a number two to the founder, or it's such a simple lift and shift into the bigger entity, what's stopping that whole business going backwards in, say, 12 to 24 months? So again, in the book, I talk about these characteristics, but each of the things, the 15 different areas, are areas that you should be diagnosing and working on if your goal is to create a transferable asset that would sell for the highest amount.
I want to continue with some of those because this is really practically actionable for people. Whenever they hear this, they can start. We're creating a level of awareness, and awareness precedes understanding. Understanding precedes change, as we know. Something that you said on a podcast many years ago, and it really stuck with me. The more valuable you are to the business as the founder, the less value the business has. And that is just so profound. So that's what we're saying here. Look, folks, if you own a business, if you're listening to this, it's about starting to think of ways where the business becomes less dependent on you. And typically the founders are involved heavily in the sales piece, potentially involved heavily in the delivery piece if it's a service business. They're potentially heavily involved in product development. But it's a case of actually thinking where where, if you're not in the business, where does the business fall down? And this is where we come to processes. So marketing channel is you're overly dependent on one channel. The business is overly dependent on one person, likely you if you're the founder of the business.
Usually you. And this is where, just to touch on this point, this is where the ego / identity thing becomes critical, right? And one thing I think it's important for your listeners to understand, right, is at the absolute simplest, right, a business has three main areas, right? And I'm going to introduce the fourth one, which is the critical piece that the founder or the owner needs to think through. It has a commercial element, which effectively is the sales and marketing. How do I drive revenue? It has an operational element. How do I deliver the thing that I'm doing, whether it's a goods, services, whatever? And it has a financial area. Most people understand the commercial and the operational. I need to sell something and I need to deliver it. They underplay the financial bit, right? They don't put enough emphasis into it. There's so many people I work with, even with 7-figure businesses, who still have their accountant running their numbers, right? But here's the real change, right? And this kind of lends itself back to what we're talking about. If you really want to scale and create something of value, the fourth pillar is strategy and leadership. And that is something you will not delegate. And quite frankly, I don't think that's going to get disrupted too easily by AI either. So if you want to take a business to the highest possible level, you delegate commercial, you delegate operations, you delegate finance, you do not delegate strategy and leadership. And you become the best you possibly can be. Now, in the game of big exits, what does that really mean around leadership? It's both personal leadership as well as it's leadership of others. So it's your responsibility to learn the game. Okay? And that's you leveling up. And that's how these big companies get built. They also realize that there's times when that person has taken the business as far as they can, and it's time to, again, great leadership, bring someone else to play a certain seat. And that's the game.
In my head, there's no downside to leaning into a commitment to scale the business, because when we think back here to the question of I'm not ready to exit, or I haven't contemplated an exit, we are all going to exit our businesses. Yeah. Folks, by virtue of exiting this planet, we are going to exit our businesses. So you can either plan for that, which is what we're advocating here, or you can leave an unplanned entity behind you, which, look, you can write your own version of the story beyond your chapter because you're so heavily involved in this. So the point here is all of the disciplines that we're suggesting should be put in place doesn't mean to say you have to exit, but leaves you in a wonderful place when the time comes.
100%. It's the optionality of having a business that is, I say often, you have a business that is built to sell or built to transfer, even if you have no immediate plans of doing so.
Yeah.
And, Mac Lackey talked about this, I think, as well. Like, that call when it comes one day where someone wants to buy your business for a stupid amount of money and you didn't expect it. You always want to be in the position to say, yeah, let's look at it, right? But I look at these characteristics, and to go into them in a bit more detail so people can hear it. And I just say, they're really simple things. Like, so, we talked about dependency on any one marketing channel. We've talked about key person risk, which is mainly the founder, but can be others. There are some other really important bits, like I talk about audit-ready financials. So this idea that you've got to treat finance as its own game in its own right. If you have a business that isn't properly built structurally, financially, then that's going to, again, kick your points down on valuation. In the world of private equity, if you really want to play in that game, and I encourage you to do so, because what's happened over the last few years is private equity involvement in transactions has literally tripled. I think the latest statistics that are coming out of the US is that 80% of all 8-figure transactions by 2030 will have private equity money involved in them. Now, private equity starts, in my experience, at about $5 million of EBITDA, if we talk about the US market. So what happens is if you can get your business to 5 million, let's say you're at 1 million or 2 million of EBITDA, your whole focus, if you want to create an amazing life-changing exit, is to get above that threshold. Because two things happen. Firstly, private equity don't like doing small deals. It's just as difficult to do a small deal as it is a big one. So they always say, let's do a big one. Once you get over that 5 million, you open up the mid-market of private equity, which is like the top of the bell curve. So in the supply and demand kind of thinking, if you get above a certain threshold, the amount of demand for you increases. So the reason they say 80% of businesses don't ever sell is because they're subscale and they haven't opened up the marketplace. Right. So again, I talk about this a little bit in the book. So if you think, oh, yeah, one day I want to sell my business for $10 million or whatever, that's going to be a hard lift, man. You're actually better off trying to get the business up a little bit higher, and then you could sell it for 50 million because you've just opened up more buyers. So it's things like that. This is what I mean about learning the game. As soon as you understand the characteristics, these are things that you can't really affect because they're truths of the game. So you just have to work out what your choices and strategies and decisions are going to be around those truths.
For those not from a financial background listening to this, what does great financial hygiene look like, which actually becomes attractive to private equity? So you said the headline number is $5 million EBITDA. What are all of the things that undergird that figure, and what should those people listening be speaking to their finance professional about on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, kind of annual basis? What are some of the most important numbers they should be tracking, Nick?
Yeah, so every industry has certain metrics, let's call it, that are important for its industry. So there are some standardized ones which I'll go through, which are kind of across most industries. But there's almost like a language in certain industries where you have to have certain minimums. If I look at that generically across everything, firstly, we're looking at growth rates. So regardless of revenue and EBITDA, let's just talk about the optics, right? So we're looking at growth rates. When I was involved in the sale of Ascend Learning, we had 10 years of consistent growth. And when that was looked at, it was like, a very simple proposition too around accredited learning, but just executed brilliantly. So when we were selling the company, everyone looked at the growth rate, the CAGR as they call it, compound annual growth rate, and were just blown away by the consistency. So in some cases, it's better to have consistent growth over an extended period of time than it is to have 100% growth, 100%, that's great. But if it's just going to die at some point, that's not good. Okay. So that's the first principle. Second principle, I think, and again, it depends on the market and everything else, but certainly for businesses that are scaling, is minimum 15% net margins. Now, this is where you could argue, well, certain industries don't have that, blah, blah, blah. You need to understand within your industry what the range is. But generally speaking, if a business is, sub 10% net margin, and it's not really like a big business that's selling like widgets, and it's multi-millions, billions, that's usually a problem, because what it's suggesting is that the OpEx part of the business is not efficiently driving sort of the top line revenues. Okay, so you're just not making enough money. And I get involved with, this is a really important distinction, I think, for business owners. So someone will come to me and say, we're doing 3-4 million and our goal is to get to 7 or 8 million. And then I go, okay, great, what's the profit? And they go, oh, we're at 10%. And I'm like, why don't you cut your top line revenue down and double or triple your bottom line profit? Because all of a sudden you're going to have a much more valuable business, because we're looking at the value based on the profitability anyway. And you're going to have resources to drive in scale and growth. But again, not everyone, but quite a lot of people, I've spoken to hundreds over the years, Brendan, as you know, they just don't have this level of understanding. This is what I mean about the financial specialization. These are basic principles of finance that, you have to learn, but at the same time, you should have people there advising you on. So that's a few of them. I mean, you can get into other things like churn rates, and the recurring revenue is a huge piece. So the idea that if you're spending marketing to drive customer acquisition, that you don't have to keep on going out there to hunt for what you need to eat, right? You're bringing people in and you're keeping them. So things like that are kind of ubiquitous across industries as well. But these are the sort of optics and metrics that a keen investor is going to be looking at your business through that lens. And everything I've just covered, you can prepare in advance, well in advance of selling your business. But again, I see lots of people not doing this, and they go to market and they haven't even thought these things through, and they wonder why they get a valuation which is not, to their expectation.
Staying on the financial piece just for a little moment. So again, what we're saying, and makes complete sense, consistency in your growth rate, the a model which is delivering recurring revenue. And I mean, all of these things, why are they important? Because ultimately they're de-risking the private equity investment. You know, if you're
Yeah.
showing a track record of year-on-year growth for 10 years, well, the probability of you growing in the 11th year is fairly high. If you're showing volatility in your growth, then ultimately there's a higher risk there that actually the next 3 years may not be consistent. It's not just a case of taking the average. So showing that consistency in your growth, having a minimum profitability of 15% net margins, and then, as we said, the recurring revenue piece. Let's just dive in, because you mentioned the OpEx
Sure.
piece, the importance of actually ensuring that you have your operating expenses tuned to such a degree that actually you're optimizing your net margins in the context of the rest of the industry. And so what are some of the other kind of tune-ups we can do to maximize our margins?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that's key here at the moment is how the technology landscape can shape this. So one of the things I'm doing a lot of consulting on at the moment is embedding, I'm not even going to say it's just AI. I think AI is the buzzword of just, using tech to create operational scale, right? Like at the end of the day, that's not new, but we have more opportunities now to think about what that model looks like. And I'm starting to work with businesses on a sort of a tiering approach where you keep high level thinking and strategy within the business. You use AI and automation in the middle layers, and then you have intelligent offshoring, leveraging exchange rates around the world. So let's say you've got a recruitment business. You kind of want to keep client relationships and really strategic things in the business. You don't want to really outsource that. You want to create any of the doing, the execution work using technology, which is where the AI layer comes in. And then any basic functionality you can use. Like I have a lot of my team in South Africa, incredible market for like capability, values, education at maybe a quarter of the cost of what you'd pay in the US, right? So if you think about what I just said then, I just gave 3 examples. They're all what would be normally people costs, right? And if you think about, okay, what have I just done? I've taken probably at least 50% of the people costs out of a business, but maybe increased the capability just by being a little bit more forward thinking about what the resources I have available to me. And so I worked recently with a recruitment business on this, and we helped take the majority of their sales team, we moved to South Africa, and they managed to increase their gross margin position by 30%, which then follows through to a much higher, I'm sure their net ended up being over 25% after we did that, but I can't remember exactly. So that's what I mean by OpEx. Like you've got to get very granular. Private equity are very granular. Even though we like a simple strategy, we go deep on the execution. And, I recently did this thing, what I call the 100-day operating playbook of how private equity is. My last podcast actually to think about these things. And if you can learn this stuff as a business owner now, right, you're not only you're going to create a valuable business that creates more freedom and more profit for you now, which is the question you asked, but you're also got a business that's going to be set to sell when you choose to. And for me, that's the ultimate game. It's not about the exit, it's about the ability of choice and the freedom of choice.
Yeah, again, makes so much sense. So we've covered off the importance of the mindset and the identity of the business owner in the first instance, and ensuring that actually you become distinguishable from the actual business that you're creating itself. So
Yeah.
that your entire identity isn't wrapped up in being the founder of XYZ Limited. That you've created an organization, you have an organizational vision, you understand you have a certain level of capability, and you're serving the needs of the organization, aligned to your capability. You want to continue to be upgrading, but understanding that at some point in time in this journey, you will seek to potentially stand back and let somebody else in who can take it even further, because you're not so wrapped up in the identity of being the founder of this business. So mindset is so critically important. The kind of importance of being committed, not just interested, and commitment requires you then to start to think about and become aware of the changes that you need to make. headline those changes across the kind of the four pillars that, you must have a business that's strong commercially. So there is an engine there that is delivering predictable, repeatable, sustainable revenues. You have an operationally strong business. You've got identifiable processes in place with the right people managing those processes, but the business isn't people dependent. You've got a strong financial arm of the business and enablement capability there within the business. You're financially savvy when it comes to managing your margins, and then your role as the leader of this business is to be strategic, to think about how do we leverage AI, for example, to support with more healthy margins. How can we actually leverage some of the talent in other parts of the world to build our capability and at the same time reduce our OPEX? So those are kind of the headlines.
Yep.
We've got into some of the characteristics of high value businesses. There's 15 of those detailed within the book. I encourage everyone to go out and grab a copy of the book when it's released on 1st of October. And so kind of moving on, then you have your scale to sale methodology, Nick. Let's touch on that. I suspect we've covered off some of the aspects, but take us through that methodology, if you would.
Sure. So what I did with that is I thought through all the deals that I was involved in private equity. And again, for context, I was a CEO 4 times under investor-backed businesses, and then I was an operating partner, which effectively means you advise and you mentor the CEOs that are under investor-backed businesses. And I thought, what are the key tenets of what happens in a sequence from the point where you have a business that's going to scale that decision, and as you said, commitment has been made all the way through to creating a big exit. And the first tenet is what we call clear end game. And it's the reverse engineering from an outcome. And this, I don't think, is a new philosophy when you think about it. But again, business owners quite often create from the ground up. And they lose, the idea about like, I'm building this thing, I'm just going to keep building this thing. I don't know where it's going because I forgot that, because I kind of had an idea when I started, but that was 5 years ago, right? And then they get to this thing where they've created a bit of a mess because they haven't got that direction absolutely crystal. So clear end game is really just being clear on the vision, right? And we both align, I think, on Cameron Herold's vivid vision. Because the vision really is the first question you get asked when you sell a company to private equity. And if you don't answer that question well, you're kicked out of the room very quickly, because the private equity firm sees the vision as a baton pass. So the vision is something that you're creating that's, may and quite often will outlast you, right? So it's that, but it's also about understanding your own personal motivations. So I often say, if someone was going to cut you a check for your business, right? And we all have a certain degree of feeling around money and wealth and that sort of stuff. I said, what does that number need to be? So I encourage people to work on those different things. There's the vision for the business, there's the vision for your life, and there's, at some point where you are going to transfer this amazing asset that you've created, what does that look like? So that's the first part of it. Second part of it is what we call strengthening foundations or de-risking. So once you're clear on what you're building towards and what it means, the worst thing, in my opinion, you can do is scale, because it's a little bit like the house analogy. You're going to put the roof sort of extension, the loft conversion, whatever it is, on top of poor foundations. So you've got to go through your business and do a shadow due diligence process, as I like to call it. So you're effectively assessing the business as if you were going to sell it by going through a rigorous, detailed exam. And I do that quite a lot with businesses, because it really goes through and shows them where there are risks points, regardless of whether they ever sell it. If they've got risks in certain areas that could make the business go backwards or cause all sorts of pain, you better to know that right up front. So once you've done that, and that can be quite a long process. A lot of business owners I work with, that could take 12 to 18 months or more to fix issues because they're not very aware, or they don't like to admit they've got them. But you do that, And then you go into the scaling component. And for me, right, and certainly my world, there's three layers to that. There's optimizing your sales and marketing, which is kind of table stakes. Then you've got overlaying strategic partnerships, which is one of the things that I think business owners don't think enough about. So how can I leverage my network? And then the big one in private equity is M&A, right? How can I create leverage and compounding value much more quickly than what most people consider? And the quickest way to do that is acquisition. So a lot of my time these days is I'm helping mentor founders through their first acquisition and helping them build the teams to support that and everything. And what you find is once they do it once and they have a success, they never stop doing it. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And all of a sudden, you can go from a business that's doing, say, 1 million of EBITDA to doing north of 5 million of EBITDA very, very quickly. I've seen it happen within 12 months with 2 or 3 very considered acquisitions.
Yeah,
Right?
just to give you an example, a company who has just graduated. Well, sorry, they graduated 3 years ago from our program. They're still in our ScaleX club. Um, They have just completed on their 6th acquisition in the
Wow,
last
fantastic.
2 years, but they had never contemplated acquisition prior to coming on the program. And I think that's part and parcel to hearing you at the summit, to hearing you in the podcast, and leaning into their first acquisition. And to your point,
Fantastic.
once they got that first one under the belt, you start to develop your playbook. So let's just. Hold that for a moment.
Sure.
What are some of the headlines in terms of the playbook for acquisition for somebody contemplating their first acquisition here? What are some of the guiding principles in
Sure.
getting
Yeah.
to a successful acquisition?
Well, I think one of the first principles is what I mentioned beforehand, which you can learn from private equity is you don't have to just go after a small deal because you think that's all you can do. Right? There's many, many ways of financing these things, right? You can, and I won't go into that's a whole podcast on how you finance acquisitions, but there's a certain amount of the deal that's going to be the cash that's required to get the deal done. But there's all these other clever ways of thinking about how you leverage what's called seller financing, which I'm sure you know about, where you kind of buy the business over time from the profits of the business. The best way to bring in an equity partner, in my opinion, is to go out there with a deal to be done. So if you ever want to bring an equity partner in, don't go out there and say, I want to raise money for building my sales and marketing team. Go out there and say, I want to raise money because I'm going to buy this business and it's going to double my EBITDA as soon as it's done. And that's a great conversation for an investor, right? So there's bits and pieces like that. So the first thing is, play as big as you can afford to play based on the resources and the leverage you have around you, because that's going to get you to your end game quicker. The second thing is about how you think about acquisitions. And there's 2 main lanes. One is what we call the horizontal play or the vertical play. So horizontal really means that you're going to buy your competitors. So you're just buying exactly what you know, might be a smaller entity. But the good thing about that is because you know how the business works, it's probably in the same industry. You won't know the nuances of the exact business, but you can absorb a lot of that business into your own structure. So I quite often see those as being very successful because you can take cost out very quickly. It can increase your customer count massively if you buy a competitor who's speaking to the same but a different group of your ideal customers. Very, very quick way to double, the revenue in your business and obviously get the profit from the cost mitigation. The other one is the vertical play, which is where you buy up and down the value chain, which simply means you buy your suppliers or anyone else that kind of sits adjacent to your business model. So the classic, one of that is if you're a car manufacturer, you'll also invest in servicing or something like that, something else that's adjacent to the model that you're in. And if you're a big one in private equity is home service roll-ups, as they call it, where you're buying a group of companies that could be roofing, air conditioning. I've been involved in landscaping and solar, but you're creating a group of adjacent services where you might be able to sell different products and services into the same customer group or the same market. And again, you get synergies from the upsell and the cross sell. So when I know there's a bit of technicality in that, but if you're a founder listening to this and you're thinking, oh, okay, yeah, actually, I was speaking to, my friend down the road who owns a business that's similar to mine. Maybe there's a conversation we should have about merging or coming together. So if it sparks that type of thinking, then that's all you need to be thinking about at this stage.
Brilliant. So in terms of then just wrapping up the scale to sale before we move into the close, the identifying, clarifying, and having a clear end game. So,
Yep.
are you going west? Are you going east? Are you going north? Are you going south? Where are we
As long as you're
holiday?
going somewhere, Brendan, that's important, right?
Absolutely. Well, I always say to people, if you went home to your partner today, for those of us who have partners, and said, I have amazing news. You're going to be so excited. We're going on holiday. The next question, the first question out of their mouth is, where are we going? And we wander into our businesses every day as business owners, and I suspect that very few can answer that question.
In the Bradley household, it's normally we're going on holiday and we'll just work it out as we go along. But don't take that as a good example. That's when you get bored of so much travel. But I agree with you. Like most partners would like to have at least some certainty of an outcome. I agree.
And then, if we're going to Canada in the winter time, that's going to inform what clothing, what currency, what gear you might take. If we're
Great
going
analogy.
to, Italy in August, well then, that's going to inform, a different outfit and how we pack in a very different way and different currency. And that's
100%.
just literally, a very straightforward, where are we going, and when are we going there? So the getting clarity around that end game, your number, what that number looks like. And just staying on that for a moment, what do you see as a life-changing number? Just curious. I mean, is it 1 million?
The number I
10
hear, I
million?
ask this question on stage all the time. I did it at your event as well, at the conference. The number I hear more often than not is around about 20 million. It usually ranges around that level, but people don't really appreciate, depends where you live, right? I'm moving to Dubai, so I'm not going to care anymore. But 20 million in a tax poor geography is not going to work too well for you, because you've got all the other costs. So, but that tends to be the number. I try and encourage people, if they've decided to scale and they've certainly got to that million of EBITDA mark, I try and encourage them to target about 50 million, because the thing I want to really impress to people here is I talked before about freedom, wealth, and impact. The journey, though, as you, the business owner, is from operator to owner to investor, right? So they're actually parallel lines, if you can visualize that. So if you get to 50 million, you would have already created a certain degree of wealth before you've sold your company, if you're at that level, right? Because you're making so much profit, you're probably taking money out and investing. So the impact piece comes later when you have the capital event. So when I talk about someone becoming an investor, it doesn't mean that they're putting their money into things to make more money. It means that they can make change. Do you see what I mean? So I often say 50 million is, if you're thinking 10, 20, level up.
Oh, there you go, folks. And there's me thinking you're going to say 5.
No, you know me well enough by now, mate. And the other thing also is I see so many people with businesses that have the potential. Because let's say you target 50 million and you end up getting 40, right? For whatever reason, you're not going to be upset with that. But if you target 5 to 10, it's kind of, I don't know, sometimes you get what you envisage and you set a goal for. So I'm a big believer in kind of going beyond that. It's like the moonshot philosophy that Google talk about.
Completely. So clarity in the end game, your number, strengthening the foundations, and then scaling and moving into the components.
There's two more to finish with, just so we don't miss it. Okay, and I'll do it quickly.
Let's do that. Yep.
So after you've scaled, the scaling piece is really about moving your EBITDA number, right? So let's say, you're targeting a 40 to 50 million dollar exit, right? You want to be north of that 5 million. So you might be saying, okay, I'm at 2 million now. I'm going to do a few acquisitions and a bit of organic growth over 18 months. And that's my scaling. For me, that's the scaling. We're talking about scaling the profit and the value predominantly, not just the operational gearing, because you would have done the operational gearing as part of the fixing the foundations. Once you've done all that and you're clear that your business is at a level now where it could sell, right? Not will, could sell. We go into what we call the profit up stage. And this is normally a 6 to 12 month period before you put the business on the market, where you literally do the due diligence process again that you did in the strengthening foundations, but you are now optimizing. And the key here is not to make wholesale changes. The last thing you want to do is take heaps of costs out of the business just before you sell, because you'll get penalized for that, right? Because there'd be too much change in a short period of time, and investors don't like that. So you're really going through and just making sure that every last piece is done. It's a little bit like, if the renovation is the sort of, the renovation piece is the fixing the foundations, is the sort of making sure your house doesn't fall apart. The scaling is putting the extension and the loft conversion on. This is now making sure the garden's looking great, the house is clean, everything's as perfect as it can be, because the next thing you're going to do, the last part of scale to sale, is the exit process, right? That's where you have to build the team. If you need to use an investment banker or something like that, that's when you'd make sure they're coming in. And you're running, I call it sell side control, where you control that process fully, because again, a theme of this conversation has been, you're going to know the game by then, so that you only start the sales process when you are personally educated and confident enough to lead that. You're not delegating that just to your broker or whatever else, because it's just too big a outcome, in my opinion, for that to be given away to someone else. So they're the five, what I call the 5 keys, the 5 pillars of the scale to sale methodology.
There is so much value in everything that you say, Nick. And I was listening to our previous podcast conversation, which was back 3 years ago. And what really struck me is how dialed in you are. You are so on this. So thank you. Before we move into our close and our signature question, is there anything you want to say to kind of put a bow on this? I'm encouraging everyone, of course, to go out and grab the book. There's too much detail to get through in this show alone, but I think we've left listeners with a wonderful flavor for your work, for the importance of actually planning their exit. Whether they take that option or not is, will be within their gift, but at least get to the planning, and there's a wonderful methodology that Nick has created to get you there. Is there anything else that we haven't touched upon that you'd like to before we move into the close?
No, I think I just want to draw a line under something you said earlier, which has been a consistent philosophy of mine, which is this idea of you can only scale anything to the level of your identity. And if the book is about anything, even though we do get into the mechanics and there's a lot in there about what private equity is and the technical side, it's really a book designed to get people considering that question, right? Are you playing a bigger game, right? Do you want to play a bigger game? And that's really what I want people to kind of, and if the answer is they're playing exactly where they need to be, that's great. If it inspires them to say, you know what, I can do something more here, then that's what I wrote the book for.
I absolutely love that. On that note, and I suspect that some of this will feature in your answer to this, can you share with our audience 3 timeless takeaways?
You know what? I knew you were going to ask this, and I deliberately don't like to prepare it. I'm going to be a bit again philosophical about this. I feel in that mood today. All right. So I think the first thing is be really clear on your own personal set of values. We haven't touched a lot on that in the conversation today. We've maybe talked around it, but I think you're never really going to go wrong if you understand what you truly value. And that will help answer many of the questions that we've posed today. The second thing is, like I just mentioned, I think we all have the potential to think bigger and to act bigger. And I love the fact that I've been able to help entrepreneurs create that freedom, wealth, and impact so that they can go on and make bigger change. And there's nothing that makes me feel more like I'm living to my purpose than to be able to do that. So I encourage everyone to think and act bigger. And then the third bit is the practical piece, really, which is, do you know what? This world of private equity and all the stuff that I talk about, and I like to think that I try and demystify it for people as best as I can, and not many people are doing it, right? It's not as scary or as crazy as you think. It's not evil. It's a proper enabler to, an outcome or result that most people would never, ever think about experiencing without that existing. So my last thing is go out there and learn it. Go out there and understand it. And I think what you'll find, you'll be pleasantly surprised of what it can enable you to do. And it'll make it something that feels maybe more compelling or congruent with what you would like to do. So that's what I'd like to say.
I absolutely love those. And the episode that preceded this episode was delivered by the wonderful Robert Glazer, who has just released a book called The Compass Within, which is which is all about understanding your values. So, understand what you value. Think bigger in alignment with those values and play it full out in the context of the bigger picture. And don't be scared to actually look behind the curtain of this private equity industry. For years, there's a mindset piece that says, well, those people are really sophisticated and they're really smart and they're taking advantage of us, and it's not a world I want to go into. What Nick's demystifying here with all of this is actually, it's not a big, bad, scary world that you can't comprehend. You learn it, you get to know it, and with that knowledge, you use it for what you want to create, for the life that you want to
100%,
have. So,
100%. And the thing I'll say about that is they will become incredibly valuable and powerful partners. And I do think the marriage between private equity and entrepreneurship is where there's a big shift that has been happening, which will continue. So think of it like a proper partnership and something that's going to enable good in the world. And that's a better way to consider it.
There we go. Well, you're doing lots of good in the world, my friend. So what's next for you beyond the book launch and lots of podcasts? You mentioned you're uprooting and moving to Dubai from sunny England.
Oh, well, yeah, other than taking 6-week holidays. No, so we're going to Dubai. I won't get into the details behind all of that, but I do think it's a frontier city in terms of growth and opportunity. And I think it's going to be a great place for my girls to sort of finish their schooling and growing up in that way. And we're also moving a couple of the businesses, particularly my high value business advisory and consultancy is now going to be based out of the UAE. So the reason for that, Brendan, is I don't think, even though there's a lot of people moving there and it's become a very entrepreneurial city, it's still underdeveloped when we talk about growth, scale, value expansion, and exiting. So I want to be one of the pioneers, I think, in that region for those concepts.
Good on you. Well, I wish you every success, continued success in your new location, in your new home. I feel you really got an understanding and living life in accordance with your values. You understand what's important to you and you're living in accordance with that, whilst at the same time scaling your own impact in the world. And it's just wonderful to watch that and to actually become friends with you over the years. And I really value that. We said right at the outset, it's been too long. It has been too long. I'm going to use the fact that you're now going to Dubai as an excuse to go to Dubai. So there we go. Nick, look, if people want to find out more about your work, what you're doing, buy the book, where best to reach you?
Yeah, the best place to reach out to me is on LinkedIn, actually. So you'll find me, my handle there is Real Nick Bradley, and you'll see my kind of profile. I always love it when people just send me a DM on there and say, hey, heard you on the ScaleX podcast and all those sort of things. So you can reach out to me there, and I normally get back to people very, very quickly. So yeah, if you get the book and you enjoy the book, then reach out to me there and let me know. I'd love that.
Yeah, well, look, thanks again for delivering so much value, for showing up with incredible energy as you always do. Even after 7 weeks of travel, I know you're a little bit fatigued, but I want to thank you. And once again, I wish you every success with everything you're doing and that you absolutely smash the book launch. So Nick, thanks again. Take care.
Yeah, thank you, Brendan. It's always a pleasure.